gives them the opportunity to still contend for a championship. And that was the most important thing that I looked at when I made my move out of Chicago, is that I'm able to go to a contender and, go play with some guys who are dedicated and know how to win. And, I'm not coming here and trying to take over. I realize that this is Hakeem's team, and hopefully I can step in and fill some of the void that they need.
There's no one like Scottie Pippen, a defensive genius, a point forward before the term even existed, and the quiet storm behind 6 rings in Chicago. But for all the praise Pippen earned on the court, off it, he rarely bit his tongue. He remembered every cheap shot, every jab, every moment he felt overlooked. And when the spotlight turned toward who he hated, not personally, but professionally, competitively, the list got personal. This isn't about grudges. It's about rivals who challenged his pride, disrespected his game, or just made it harder to win. These are 6 players Scottie Pippen hated facing, and some of them wore the same jersey. Before proceeding, please take a second and subscribe and like this video. It will be very motivation for us. The first name on the list was never going to be easy to say out loud: Michael Jordan. Not because Scottie feared him, but because hating someone you built your legacy beside, that takes a different kind of honesty. Scottie Pippen didn't hate Jordan the way opponents did. He hated him in the way you hate someone who controls the light while you sit in the shadow, who becomes the myth while you remain the role player, even when you know it wasn't that simple. They won 6 titles together, dominated the 90s, but if you think that means the road was smooth, you weren't watching closely, because behind the smiles, there was always a storm brewing. Pippen was drafted in 1987. By the time Jordan won his first MVP in '88, the Bulls were already being called his team. Scottie was still a skinny kid trying to prove he belonged, and every year after that, the gap only widened. Not in performance, but in perception. Scottie locked down Magic Johnson in the '91 finals. He guarded Charles Barkley in '93. He ran the offense while Jordan took the headlines. He sacrificed, adapted, and anchored a dynasty. But when The Last Dance aired decades later, and Jordan's voice narrated the story of the Bulls, Scottie didn't just feel forgotten, he felt erased, and the resentment that had been simmering quietly for years finally boiled over. Pippen later said, "Michael was determined to prove he could win without anyone's help, but I was there every step of the way." To him, Jordan's greatness was undeniable, but the way it cast everyone else aside, that part stung. It wasn't one moment that created the fracture. It was 1,000 small cuts, interviews that didn't mention him, sneaker deals that dwarfed his, public praise that seemed to ignore what Scottie brought to the floor. Even in the locker room, Jordan led with fire. He mocked, challenged, and pushed. For some, it was motivation. For Scottie, it was sometimes humiliation. And when Jordan left in 1993, Pippen finally stepped into the lead role. He finished 3rd in MVP voting, led the Bulls to 55 wins without MJ, hit game winners, took technicals, battled the Knicks in one of the most brutal playoff series of the decade. But even then, he was labeled the guy holding things together until Jordan came back. So yes, Scottie Pippen hated Michael Jordan, not because he wasn't great, but because the world acted like he was the only one who was. Because every time Scottie looked at those 6 rings, he saw sweat, sacrifice, and defense. But the world just saw the logo, the tongue, the shoes. And deep down, Pippen knew, without him, Jordan might still be a legend. But not that legend. That's the kind of hate that doesn't come from rivalry. It comes from being necessary, but never treated like it.
There's Kareem, and then there's a debate, in terms of Jordan and LeBron. And on any given night, who do you like? For me, I look at, the total body of work, what LeBron James is as a basketball player. And if I had to pick one over the other, right now I'm picking LeBron James over a Michael Jordan.
Scottie Pippen didn't hate a lot of players, but Bill Laimbeer wasn't like the rest. That wasn't competition. That was conflict. Laimbeer made the game ugly on purpose, and Pippen never forgot it. Detroit's battles with Chicago are burned into NBA history. Every series felt like a street fight disguised as basketball. But while Jordan took the hits, it was Pippen who carried the bruises in silence, bruises that went deeper than skin. Because when you stepped into the lane, Laimbeer was waiting. Not with defense, with impact, a shoulder, a forearm, a takedown, and always that look, smug, deliberate, like pain was the point. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he understood leverage, timing, and how to turn contact into control. He didn't just play the game, he manipulated it. And for a young Pippen, still building confidence, still learning how to hold his ground, That kind of opponent was more than just frustrating. It was personal. One playoff moment stands out. Late in Game 3 of the 1989 Eastern Conference Finals, Laimbeer wrapped up Scottie midair and slammed him to the floor. No whistle, no remorse. Just Laimbeer jogging away as if it were routine. Scottie didn't get up angry. He got up changed. Because that wasn't basketball, not to him. That was intimidation. And the league was letting it happen. Over the years, Pippen kept quiet about a lot of things. But whenever Laimbeer's name came up, his tone shifted. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't perform. He just let the silence speak. Asked once if he respected Laimbeer, he didn't hesitate. No, not even a little. It wasn't about the stats. It wasn't about the rings. It was about the way Laimbeer carried himself, as if playing dirty was a badge of honor, not a flaw. To Pippen, that mindset disrespected the game. And then came 1991. The Bulls finally break through, sweep the Pistons, send them home. And with time still on the clock, Laimbeer walks off the court. No handshake, no acknowledgement, just gone. To Jordan, that was petty. To Scottie, it confirmed everything he already knew. He had spent years taking those fouls, biting his tongue, waiting for his moment. And when he finally stood taller, when Chicago finally stood together, Laimbeer refused to meet him at center court. That stung more than any elbow. Years later, Pippen said the Pistons lacked class. He wasn't just talking about walk-offs. He was talking about an entire philosophy of basketball that tried to win by breaking your will instead of outplaying your skills. And nobody embodied that more than Laimbeer. Even now, decades removed, Scottie doesn't mask it. He doesn't laugh about it. There's no softening with time. Bill Laimbeer was the one opponent he never wanted to understand and never tried to forgive. Charles Barkley wasn't just loud. He was relentless. And that's exactly what got under Scottie Pippen's skin. Because Pippen didn't do antics. He didn't do headlines. He didn't chase controversy. But Barkley was controversy, wrapped in talent, powered by force, and broadcast at full volume every night. They weren't enemies at first. In the early 90s, they were stars on parallel tracks. Both Olympians, both All-Stars, both trying to break through in an era defined by Michael Jordan. But for Pippen, the line between respect and resentment started to blur fast. Barkley had always been brash, but the 1993 NBA Finals flipped everything. Pippen's Bulls versus Barkley's Suns. Jordan was still the centerpiece, sure, but Scottie was the glue, the engine, the quiet killer behind every possession. He guarded Kevin Johnson. He ran the offense when MJ rested. He did the dirty work while Barkley grabbed the spotlight. And that spotlight, Barkley chased it like a magnet. "I'm the best player in the world," Barkley had declared before Game 1, even with Jordan still breathing on the same court. To Pippen, that wasn't confidence, that was ignorance. And so, when the Bulls took that series in 6, with Pippen locking down defensively and giving Chicago the edge in tempo, he didn't forget those quotes. He didn't forget the chest thumping. He just filed it away the way he always did. But the real split came in Houston. Jordan was gone. The dynasty was over. And Barkley? He convinced Pippen to come join him and Hakeem Olajuwon for one last run with the Rockets. Scottie wasn't thrilled about the move, but after being traded from the Bulls, he wanted one more shot at relevance, one more shot at contending. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. From the moment training camp began, the chemistry was off. Barkley wanted the ball. Pippen wanted structure. Barkley joked too much. Pippen took things seriously. They didn't clash in public, not yet, but behind closed doors. The tension started bubbling. And then came the final straw, a first-round playoff loss to the Lakers. The Rockets were out in 4. Pippen played well. Barkley, not so much. But Barkley, he blamed everyone, the system, the spacing, the coaching. And in interviews, he made it clear he expected Pippen to take on more responsibility, to be more vocal, to step up. That didn't sit well. Days later, Pippen unloaded in an ESPN interview. "I didn't come here to babysit Charles Barkley. I'm not trying to get into it with him, but I'm not a fan of his. I don't like the way he carries himself." That wasn't frustration. That was disgust. He kept going. "I think Charles is selfish. I don't think he's committed to winning. That's my problem with him." And just like that, years of simmering tension boiled over. Barkley fired back, mocking Pippen for leaving the Bulls and failing to lead a team on his own. He laughed it off on air, but the sting was real, and so was the fracture. They never patched it up. Years later, Barkley softened his tone. He said he regretted things, wished they'd worked out. He even called Pippen a great teammate and competitor. But Pippen, I meant what I said. I don't regret it, because to him, Barkley represented something he never respected: flash over focus. Barkley wanted rings, but never sacrificed for them. He wanted to win, but not if it meant changing his game. Not if it meant giving up shots, or leadership, or control. And for a guy like Scottie, who built his legacy around sacrifice, that was unforgivable. They played on Dream Team 92 together. They shared all-star locker rooms. They even shared commercials. But Pippen never trusted him because Barkley always made it about Barkley. And for a man who spent his entire career in the shadows of ego, only to become one of the most complete team-first players in history, there was no room left for admiration, only contempt.
I've always said, come late June, Charles be criticizing his teammates, the franchise, and everybody that he can point a finger at.
There are rivalries built on competition. And then there's Scottie Pippen and Isiah Thomas, a relationship forged in resentment and layered with years of cold distance. Thomas was born in Chicago. Pippen became a Chicago icon. That shared geography was about the only thing they had in common. Isiah played with flair, but behind that grin was a dagger. He was calculating, political, and unrelenting. Pippen, by contrast, was all structure, defense, discipline, and quiet pride. When they collided in the late 80s and early 90s, it wasn't just about basketball. It was a war of values. By the time Pippen entered the league, Isiah was already an NBA champion. The Pistons ruled the East with a swagger that bordered on cruelty. Their physical style, known as the Jordan Rules, wasn't just about stopping Michael. It was about sending a message to Chicago. You're not ready. Pippen heard that message every time he stepped on the court. Detroit's plan was simple: punish the Bulls until they broke. Jordan took the bruises, Grant took the screens, but Pippen, he took the humiliation. And in his mind, it all flowed from one man, the floor general pulling the strings. Isiah, he wasn't throwing the hardest elbows. He wasn't the one body-checking Pippen into the hardwood, but he was the brain behind it, the one who made it all feel coordinated. Pippen saw through the smile, the handshake, the occasional compliment in front of the cameras. To him, Isiah wasn't just a rival. He was fake, and nothing fueled Scottie's hatred more than that. The grudge turned permanent in 1992 when the Dream Team was formed. Isiah Thomas, one of the greatest point guards of all time, was left off the roster. Pippen didn't protest. In fact, years later, he openly admitted he didn't want Thomas on the team. No, he said flatly when asked, if he was on it, I wouldn't have played. That wasn't just competitive talk. That was a man still carrying years of disrespect, buried deep and untouched by time. Isiah fired back. He never missed a chance to remind the world that Pippen wasn't the alpha. He was Jordan's sidekick, Thomas once said. Good player, but never the man. To Scottie, that was exactly the problem. Even when he rose to become one of the best two-way players in the league, people like Isiah still saw him as an accessory, still talked down, still tried to reduce him. He'd been hearing that since his early days in Chicago, and he never let it go. One of the most enduring images in NBA history comes from the end of the 1991 Eastern Conference Finals. The Bulls had finally beaten the Pistons, swept them. It was Chicago's moment. But as the final seconds ticked away, Isiah and several teammates left the court early. No handshakes, no congratulations, no respect. Pippen never forgot that either. That told me everything I ever needed to know, he said later. They knew it was over, and they couldn't handle it. It wasn't about the series or the handshakes. It was about pride. For Pippen, Isiah Thomas represented a generation of basketball that never believed in him and never gave him his due. Even in retirement, when tempers should cool and grudges should fade, Pippen refused to let go. He was direct in interviews, unforgiving. I have no respect for him, he said. None. And when you hear that tone, not angry, just cold, you realize this wasn't some petty beef. It was a line in the sand, because for Scottie, some things are bigger than basketball: dignity, respect, how you carry yourself when you win and when you lose. And when the time came to name the players he truly hated, there was no hesitation. Isiah was always on the list.
I didn't want Isiah to be on the Dream Team. I don't mind, if Larry Bird said, I don't want Isiah to be on the Dream Team. But if Scottie Pippen say, I don't want Isiah to be on the Dream Team. That's the problem. Man, come on. You can't say nothing.
Scottie Pippen didn't hate Patrick Ewing because of a foul or a dirty play or a trash-talking quote in a newspaper. He hated him because he had to. Because if you were going to win in the Eastern Conference during the 90s, you had to go through the Knicks. And going through the Knicks meant going through Patrick Ewing, the center of gravity for a franchise that specialized in making your life miserable. Ewing didn't throw elbows like Laimbeer. He didn't politic like Isiah. He didn't jaw like Reggie. He just showed up, game after game, with that same scowl, that same intensity, and made you earn everything. Pippen respected that, but it also drove him crazy because every time the Bulls faced New York, it was a war of attrition. No easy buckets, no clean cuts. Every drive to the rim ended with a body on the floor. And at the heart of it all, looming in the paint, swatting shots, snatching rebounds, talking with his eyes, was Ewing. The rivalry between the Bulls and Knicks wasn't built on flash. It was built on pain, and Pippen felt every ounce of it. Throughout the early 90s, the Knicks were the last team standing between Chicago and the finals. In 1992 and 1993, they pushed the Bulls to 7 and 6 games respectively, and in both of those series, Patrick Ewing was relentless. In the 93 Eastern Conference Finals, with Jordan battling fatigue and frustration, it was Pippen who had to carry more of the offensive load, and that meant going straight into the heart of the Knicks' defense, a defense that revolved around a 7-foot Jamaican-born giant who played like he was made of concrete and steel. Ewing averaged 25 points and 12 rebounds in that series, but stats didn't tell the whole story. What Pippen remembered wasn't the box score. It was the bruises, the ice baths, the slow walk back to the locker room after another night of getting knocked around, the psychological toll of knowing that every possession was going to be a street fight, that Ewing was going to be there waiting, that no matter how hard you played, how sharp your execution, he was still going to make you bleed for it. And then came 1994. Michael Jordan was gone, retired, playing baseball, and for the first time, Scottie Pippen was the man. He'd put together the best season of his career, All-NBA first team, All-Defensive first team, third in MVP voting. The Bulls were still contenders, and in the second round of the playoffs, they met the Knicks once again. This was supposed to be Pippen's moment, a chance to finally take down Ewing on his own terms, but instead, it turned into a nightmare. The series stretched to 7 games. Every contest was a grind. Tempers flared, bodies flew, and Pippen, playing with the weight of the entire city on his shoulders, began to feel the pressure. In Game 3, the most infamous moment of his career arrived. With 1.8 seconds left in a tied game, Phil Jackson drew up the final play. Not for Pippen, but for Tony Kukoc. Pippen refused to go back in the game. He sat on the bench, furious, humiliated, unable to process what felt like betrayal. And when Kukoc hit the game winner, it didn't feel like a win. It felt like a fracture. Ewing and the Knicks ultimately won that series. In Game 7, the Bulls had a chance to tie the game in the final seconds, and Pippen drove hard to the basket, only to be met by Ewing, who cleanly blocked the shot. It was the final dagger. That moment, the block, the loss, the heartbreak, embedded itself deep in Pippen's memory. And it was personal, not because Ewing trash-talked or celebrated, but because Pippen saw Ewing as the mountain he couldn't quite climb. Later, when asked about the Knicks' rivalry, Pippen admitted, "They were always in our way. It was never easy, especially with Patrick. He didn't call him dirty. He didn't call him cheap. But when Scottie listed the guys he truly hated playing against, Patrick Ewing made the cut, not because of some petty feud, but because every time they met, he was a reminder of pain, of struggle, of how hard it was to get where he wanted to go, and how easily it could all slip away."
Well, I guess to most people, it's probably one of the greatest dunks that they've seen me have, or maybe one of the greatest dunks in the history of the game. But wow, what a season, playing against the Knicks, and it was a lot of fun, to be honest with you. We were knocking the Knicks off every year, and they could never get past us.
Scottie Pippen never forgot the sound, not the crowd, not the final buzzer, not even the swish of a game winner. It was Reggie Miller's voice, high-pitched, relentless, sarcastic, echoing across the floor, cutting through the chaos like a dagger made of noise. Trash talk was one thing, but Reggie, he turned it into a weapon, not just a mind game, a full-blown psychological operation. He didn't care who you were, didn't care how many rings you had, how many points you scored, or how tough your team was. If you crossed that half-court line wearing a Bulls jersey, you were a target. And for Scottie Pippen, who took pride in composure and silence, Reggie Miller was everything he hated. Their rivalry didn't erupt overnight. It simmered. Through the early 90s, the Pacers were still climbing. Miller was developing into a star, and Pippen was stepping into greatness under Jordan's shadow. But every matchup between the Bulls and Pacers felt a little more tense than the last. A few more elbows, a few more stares, and always, Reggie's mouth running nonstop. Then came 1998. By then, Michael Jordan had returned. The Bulls were chasing a 6th championship. And Indiana, they weren't just in the way. They were a real threat. Coached by Larry Bird, deep roster, hungry, disciplined, confident, and right at the center of it all, Reggie Miller. The 1998 Eastern Conference Finals turned into a war. For 7 games, it was survival. Chicago's dynasty versus Indiana's moment. And Reggie, he didn't just show up, he delivered. In Game 4, with the Pacers down 2-1, Miller hit one of the most iconic shots of his career, a game-winning fadeaway over Michael Jordan with 0.7 seconds left on the clock. Pandemonium. The crowd exploded, and Miller didn't just celebrate. He shoved Jordan before the shot, then held the pose, then shouted in every direction. Pippen? He didn't forget that either. That series tested Chicago in ways they weren't used to. Every game was close, every possession a brawl, and Miller never stopped talking. He clapped in faces, barked at refs, mocked Jordan, taunted Pippen, called out Kukoc. He was chaos in motion, and unlike most, he didn't blink under pressure. Scottie didn't fear Reggie physically. He didn't think Miller was stronger, faster, or more skilled. What got under his skin was Miller's immunity to intimidation. The Bulls were built on mental warfare. They imposed their will. But Reggie, he flipped the script. He wanted the fight. He embraced it. And that forced Pippen, usually cool, methodical, in control, to play on someone else's emotional terms. In Game 6, when the Pacers won to tie the series 3-3, Miller scored 20 points and hit clutch shots in the fourth quarter. He winked at the Bulls bench, smirked on the way to the timeout, and when the cameras caught him mouthing, "We got him," it felt like an invasion. For Pippen, that was the final straw. He hated the way Miller celebrated, the way he disrespected legacies, the way he made every game feel like a stage, and himself the star. In Game 7, the Bulls finally closed the door. Barely. It was a 5-point win, one of the tightest Game 7s in Bulls history. Jordan scored 28. Pippen chipped in 17, but it wasn't comfortable, it wasn't dominant, and even in the loss, Reggie left his mark. He walked off smiling, waving to the crowd, like he'd done enough to rattle the throne and remind the world that fear wasn't in his vocabulary. Years later, Pippen was asked who got under his skin the most. He didn't hesitate. "Reggie," he said. "Just Reggie." There was no personal beef, no off-court scandal, just a long, exhausting history of games where Miller refused to go away, refused to shut up, refused to be humbled. And that, to a guy like Scottie, who lived for discipline, structure, quiet excellence, was unforgivable. Some rivalries fade, some get forgiven, but not this one, not with Reggie. Because for Scottie Pippen, hate wasn't loud, it was personal. And speaking of personal, Wilt Chamberlain didn't just dominate the game, he had a list of players he hated. Hit that next video and find out who made it. If you still did not subscribe to the channel, please do subscribe and like this video as well and share your thoughts in the comment section.